I'm so delighted with all the people who have given us a little bit of their time today. And I actually wanted to start out learning a little bit about where they are. So I'm going to put up a poll. And this poll is about how you would rate your own familiarity with the topic of impact, measurement, and management. So I'm going to give you a minute or two to fill that out. Give us a sense of the 270 or so of us who are in the room now, how we spread. So I'll wait another minute or two and then we'll look at that. Okay, I'm going to show you that poll. So we have a big hump in the middle of people having some knowledge, very few novices, and even fewer experts. I wanted to show you, we've been running this online course, which I'll talk about in a second. This is how the people inside the course rate their knowledge, which is extremely similar to you. Majority, know a little, but continuing to learn. And I wanted to share, oh, I didn't share the results with you. Sorry, there they are. The results that you can see from yourselves. And then I am going to ask you a second poll question real quick, which is about motivation for being here. You guys are answering faster this time. This one must be easier. Up to about 70% of the room answering, and give you another minute. Okay, I'm going to close it now, and this time I'm going to remember to share it. There we go. You guys see that? So, topics relevant to my current job. Everyone thinks this subject is relevant. Employers encouraging is very, very low, and kind of some relevance to the future job. And I'm going to show you again kind of how that compares to people who are taking this course, and it is very similar, where we have over 70% saying this is relevant to my current job, but employers are not actually promoting this yet. So that is a kind of ground set I wanted to put for the conversation today, which is we're hoping that perhaps that would change over time. And to give a little bit of context for this, I actually wanted to turn to Lori first, to think about this issue of, for investors around the practices of impact and measurement and management. What's going on here? Why is it the #1 topic in David's surveys? Why are there 279 people in the room here saying it's relevant to their job? Why is this important? And what do you think is kind of missing that perhaps we can draw out from our new training today? Lori?
Super, thanks, Cathy. And it's great to be here. Great to see so many people joining. And it is the hot topic. It's the top menu choice. I'd say it's the whole menu, actually, to David. I don't think it's just the steak. And I think because it allows you to really know what you're selecting on the menu and understand when the item arrives, what you really have had, and then you can provide feedback afterwards. I really think this is at the center of what we are doing. It's why we are here as impact investing professionals. The core question we always want to be asking ourselves, whatever chair we sit in, whether we're an allocator, we're a manager, we're somewhere around the capital table, is what is the capital doing? What's it actually doing? What impact is it having on people's lives? What is changing in the places where the capital flows to? That's the centerpiece. That's the core question. And so the practice of impact management and measurement allows us to answer that question. So I think that's why it's the #1 gravitational pull around our table. What's the Capitol doing? Also, increasingly, what is the Capitol not doing? Being able to ask and answer that question, not in a judgmental way, but in an informational way, to assess, to be open and honest and transparent, both for the commitments that we've made, but also hopefully to inform future actions and strategies we'll be taking. So to me, that's why it's the centerpiece. I think we put it into context of the global challenges, the SDGs, all of our thematic orientations, the commitments that we've made. We better, I mean, given the urgency of the issues that confront us, that were certainly only exacerbated by all of us living through COVID, we better be moving with alacrity to really look at what's happening with the capital flows and what's not happening. So I think it really informs the decisions and judgments that we're going to be making on a forward-looking basis. So I think that's the why. I think though, to answer your second question, Cathy, as to what's missing and the how, and I think this is also a reason so many of us are around this table, and I think your course is the timing of it is so terrific, is that I think a lot of people are saying, okay, right, I get why I should be doing this. I'm motivated to do it. And also there's the offensive and defensive pull, defensive being regulators, the washing criticisms, other things, but the offensive, which is what I was really leading with, the desire to know what's happening when I deploy my capital. But I think the how questions are really the core. And for me, I was thinking about this. There are 4 core how questions that really popped. One was, how do I rationalize, reconcile, and utilize all of these existing standards and frameworks and operating principles that are out there? I mean, how do I actually use them? So I've educated myself. I've been reading all of them. I'm probably a signatory to many of them, but how do I use them? The second is, how do I ensure that there's a linkage between the investment level consideration and the underlying enterprise where my capital is flowing? And I think too often these conversations have been separated. And I really, especially as an investor, I want to see the linkage, the flow between the capital in a fund, for example, and all the way through to the investee at the enterprise level. So how do I see that connective tissue? The third is, how do I embed this practice across my investment process, from origination to underwriting, to structuring, to reporting, to learning, and most importantly, to informing the next decisions that I'm going to take. So how do I really embed it in my investment process? And the fourth, which I think is a perfect segue back to you, Cathy, is how do I get started? How do I avoid falling into the trap of the perfection trap? I've got to have everything sorted, done and dusted before I even start doing this. So how do I begin? How do I get going? And so I think it's the why and the how that really pull us together and to join you today, Cathy. And so I'll turn it back to you.
Oh, well, I really love that list, Lori. I mean, I feel like this is such a big, hairy topic for so many people, and so many of us have spent so many years trying to disentangle it, make it easy. And you kind of turned it into these 4 practical things, which is, how do I decide what to use? How do I link it to what I'm actually choosing to invest in? How do I embed it throughout my process? And then how do I actually kind of know where I'm going to go and get started in the right step? Those are all great. And they relate to kind of this practical orientation that we took into designing this new course. So what I'm going to do over the next little bit is I'm going to kind of do 2 different things. First, I'm going to give an overview of what's inside this course, so that everybody on this call kind of gets the sneak peek into what's there. Second, I'm going to go deep into one particular lesson, just to give you a taste of how granular the lessons get. And it's one that's relevant to all investors. Then we're going to come back and hear from Beth a little bit, because she has actually gone deep on that particular lesson, and she can share some of her own experience at Calvary Impact Capital. And then we will open it up for Q&A. So I just want to give you the rundown of what to expect. So the new course that we've designed is called Impact Measurement and Management for the SDGs. It aims to help both enterprises and investors get better at measuring and managing their impact, and specifically in ways that align with current and emerging standards and regulations. And so there's a bunch of things that are important here. One is that it is both for enterprises and investors, and we'll talk more about why later. And second is that it is really very much at the cutting edge of discussions and kind of telling you what's coming next, not kind of looking backwards at how practice has been, but looking forwards at what are the new regulatory constraints, what are the new standards that are coming out. And this particular training was commissioned by the UNDP, which is the arm of the UN that created the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure almost everyone on the call is familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals that 190 countries, 190 some countries have decided that they want to try to achieve by 2030 to achieve sustainable, equitable development for the planet. Well, SDG Impact, which is a team at the UNDP, has put out new standards around what the UN is starting to expect if you are an investor or an enterprise trying to adhere to those standards. And what's different about this is that they are standards that are going to be verifiable. In other words, they're going to have, they're designing an assurance process so that people can come in and say, did you actually incorporate this practice, yes or no? And are you doing it in a way that is sufficient for us to be confident? That is new, right? We have the operating principles, which often also have a verifiable component, and we have some other principles and standards for enterprises. We have some certifications, but mostly we have a lot of reporting guidelines. This is a little bit different. And so we were commissioned by UNDP to make this easy, to make it easier for people for wherever they're starting to get a little bit better at what they're doing and also understand kind of what's coming. And the course was developed internally at Duke with our great team at CASE and others at Duke and Fuqua, with help from the SDG Impact team, the Impact Management Project, and a very large team of advisors and practitioners over 6 continents. And my colleague Carrie may have already or may be about to put in a link, because we want to thank this took a village. And there's a lot of people who helped us. The course is also the UNDP, and we wanted to make this accessible. So it's available for free. It's available to anyone. It takes about 10 hours to do the whole course. And it's video based. You watch the videos and you take short quizzes. There's also worksheets and exercises and databases and resource libraries and other things that we built into it so that people could, link to common things to make this easier. And then I also just wanted to mention that this has only been open for 2 weeks. We're 2 weeks in. We've already had over 1,400 people enroll in the course, and over 20 have completed the training, which is amazing. And they're coming from all over the world, as you can imagine, because we have promoted this together with the UNDP. And Carrie will share a link to the course shortly, as well as to the UNDP press release, which we were very proud of, because we were grateful to that team and proud to be launched by the UN. I'm going to walk through how the course is organized and kind of what roles it's relevant for. So we took the kind of very diverse steps of what different standards and practices have, and we boiled this down to 4 simple steps, and they are here. The idea is that first you set your strategy about what are the SDG impacts that you are trying to achieve, and there's a whole set of things underneath that around how do you decide what's material to your stakeholders, how do you set goals, we'll talk about that in a second. Second is, once you've decided on your strategy, how do you integrate those objectives into how you work every day? And you do that as an enterprise very differently than you may do that as an investor. But I'm going to walk you through some of the steps an investor needs to do to start integrating when we get to the deeper dive. The third step, I find this is really critical, because I feel like in many, in much of our common practice today, we skip this. We kind of go from, I know I want to track some things, I'm going to put that as part of my integrate step, is to kind of set up the metrics. And then later I'm going to report on it. But there's this middle step that is extremely important to both sets of standards, the biggest sets of standards for investors, the SDG Impact Standards and the operating principles, which is this idea that you are measuring so that you can make decisions. You are measuring so that you can manage your impact, evaluate what's going on, and figure out how to optimize impact actively. An enterprise has a lot more control over that than an investor does, but an investor has a lot of leverage as well. And so we differentiate those roles and talk about that. The last step is reinforce. Reinforcing is, how do you report? How do you embed what you've done deeper into your governance? And how do you get ready for a third-party verification or assurance process? So I also just wanted to give you a little bit more of a picture of how this kind of relates, these 4 steps, to the 2 sets of standards that I mentioned. On the left, we have the SDG Impact Standards, which go from strategy to management approach to transparency to governance. On the right are the operating principles for impact management, the 9 principles that were put out by the IFC. And these 4 steps allow you to adhere to both sets of standards. They also allow you to adhere to many of the enterprise standards, although I don't have a slide on that. They are kind of the core universal steps that it takes to do this work well. And they're kind of a change management process, right? As opposed to kind of what do I measure? This is kind of how do I start? How do I get deeper? How do I make sense of it? And of course, it's actually a cycle, because then you go back and readjust your strategy as you learn things and continue to do that. The other thing I wanted to mention about the training is that we used a teaching shortcut. We're shameless, which is putting people in roles and kind of allowing you to see how this is done from the perspective of different people in the value chain. And so we have 2 enterprise roles. One of them, Grace, is a maternity chain clinic in South Africa. So she's like an impact company SME. One of them is Miguel, who is a vice president at a multinational agricultural firm in Brazil. So we have kind of small enterprise and big corporate on the left side, on the enterprise side. On the investor side, we track through the 4 steps 2 different kinds of investors. Akil is the cognate for an impact manager, like a fund manager who runs a VC fund in India, but goes through the steps that a fund would go through. And then Paula, we have as our asset owner. So if you're a foundation or you're a pension fund or you're a family office, Paula is a pension fund manager. And so I just wanted to show you how we decided to make it easy to figure out how do you kind of navigate these 4 steps from different roles. And so you can kind of go through the training and pick out, what's relevant for Akil and how would that apply to me, for example, if I were a fund. When you put these together, the 4 steps and the roles, you end up with the map for the course, which is that we have an introductory module, but then there's 4 modules, and in each one you work through these steps for enterprises first, and then you work steps for investors second. And that's purposeful because, as Lori said in the beginning, we realize that as investors, you are dependent on information that is coming to you from down the chain, whether you're directly investing in enterprise or you're investing in a fund of fund that invests in a fund that eventually invests in enterprises. You're still depending on that information. And so we wanted everyone to understand kind of what the roles and responsibilities are and where the boundaries are between, doing the impact and making decisions about it as an investor. I also just wanted to, we talked about how important Optimize is. That's why we decided to call the series that we're doing with Impact Alpha, Optimizing for Impact. I feel like, the getting a little bit more tangible and granular for all of us about what we are doing in the Optimize step is so important for the field. And it is missing from a lot of the reporting, certainly, and some of the practices behind the scenes. And so I just wanted to emphasize that again. I want to take a breath here because I have not had a chance to look at anything in the chat and just maybe check in with David, Lori, or Beth to see if there's some question or comment that I should be attentive to before I keep going.
I think you're going great. There's a few questions coming up, but we'll get those in the Q&A. So
okay, nothing.
Let's just keep optimizing. Yeah.
All right, we'll keep optimizing. Do my best. Take my own medicine. So what I'm going to do now is kind of walk you through what's actually underneath each of these, right? So if you took the course, and it's a week-by-week course because that's how Coursera does it. Again, each module is 1 to 3 hours, so you could do this in a weekend. As I think Mike McCarthy's on the call, just did it in 2 days. And then posted it on LinkedIn, and I gave him a gold star because he's a former student and I was very proud of him. Or you can, eke it out. But so I'm going to go week by week and kind of show you what's underneath. And we haven't shared this before outside of the course, so I'm excited to do it. So the first module is some basics. First basic is, what are the 5 dimensions of impact? These are the 5 dimensions from the Impact Management Project. Most people told us, I know what those are. And then when we actually asked them, what are they? We got a lot of different answers. So this is a kind of ground setting in what are they, what do they mean? Because then they become core concepts that we pull throughout the rest of the training. Second thing we do are, what are the SDG Impact Standards about? Who are they for? What's the context of them? How are they different? And so you just get a grounding. These are the only standards that I'm aware of that have been produced both for enterprises and for investors, and putting them in the same frame. And so that is really significant, and we wanted different people to understand that. The second module is on setting strategy, and this one has 5 steps. Each step has its own video, right? So this is the idea, is that you kind of learn what the step is, you see some examples, and then you start to understand kind of how you would apply it to your own work. It starts with defining the investment thesis for the pot of money that you as an investor are managing for impact. We don't know if that's a whole endowment or a piece of your portfolio or a fund, but trying to understand what is the investment thesis without impact or with impact, like without thinking about SDGs too much. What is the actual argument that you're trying to make about your impact? Then we have you add in, what are the SDG outcomes that you and your stakeholders care most about? There's a whole thing in here around, for the enterprises, very, very strong on what is material to the stakeholders that the enterprise is touching. We apply the same sort of thing to investors to say, who are the stakeholders of this capital? If you're a foundation, that answer is very different from if you're a university, for example. Who are the stakeholders of this capital, and what are the SDG outcomes that they care about? We then have you prioritize those SDG outcomes to decide which ones are most important, and then define an impact thesis for each of these. As you're defining your impact thesis, we bring in the Impact Management Project again, and we ask you to assign an impact level goal, an A, B, or C goal, to each of your major SDG outcomes. We do this by outcome. And as you go through the training, you see why, because you manage your impact differently if it's an A, B, or C goal. I don't know if everyone on the call is familiar with the ABCs. I can go into it a little bit more in the after Q&A, but they require different information and they require different management. And so we have people specify at least what you're intending to do at the beginning. And then the last step under set strategy is actually writing it in, right? Embedding it into your strategic documents. For many investors, that's an investment policy statement. And we actually have a library of investment policy statements broken down by the different terms, so that you can say, I want to add this term. How many other statements is that in? Let me look at those and let me design that. So trying to make it very easy for people to say, if you're really committed to managing an SDG or another impact over the coming period, put that into your governance so that it is clear to all of your stakeholders and it becomes an enforcement mechanism. I also just want to point. Yeah.
Sorry, this is Laurie. I just wanted to interject, just so you could double down on a question. You're getting a couple of these questions. That what you're sharing here, really, it's not about individual instruments. It's instrument agnostic, structure agnostic. It cuts across, because there's some really good questions in the chat about specificity of deal structures and in different scenarios and different types of entities and different types of funds or vehicles. But I just think that's an important point to reinforce. And so if there's a grounding, it's in the outcome that you are focused on, but it cuts across structures and investment instruments.
It does. It does. We are trying to be universal and neutral about the specific instrument that you use, but and the roles help us do that, because we can also kind of say, how would this differ for someone who is managing money for someone else versus someone who is like a pension holder, a pension fund owning the assets. The 5 steps under set strategy, that is the biggest module. So my other tip for you is, if you get through this one, the other ones are much faster. There's a lot to do up front. In the second step is integrate. This one's about, as I said before, how do you take the goals that you articulated and integrate them into your daily operations and decision-making across all stages of the investment process? So we have a lesson on how to do that, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes. We have a really good summary lesson on how do you change your diligence if you are doing impact investing, specifically around SDGs, but around other impacts. What are the best practices that you need to integrate into the selection of new investments, which is universal for all investors who are committing to do this. And then the third one is, what are the things that you can do to prepare to monitor investments once you've made them? What are the operational things that different investors have done to put them in place? Next, we have Optimize, which we broke down into this three-part structure that I think is extremely powerful, which is what happened, looking at your data and understanding what happened, which is often already happening when people report on key performance indicators, but that is not enough. The other two questions are really important. Why did it happen? What meaning can you give to the fact that your answer was 70 last quarter, right? What does that mean? You have to compare it to something. You either have to compare it to what you expected it to be, or you have to compare it to something outside of yourself, and trying to understand when underperformance happens, why? When overperformance happens, why? You as an investor have a responsibility to monitor and to ask these questions of your investees around their achievement of the SDGs. And the third one is, what will you do about it? What are the actions that either your investment will take, or that you as an investor can take around what you learned in the last period? And so we're trying to insert a new management practice into this investment process of really thinking about how to evaluate and make new decisions about what needs to be done. The last one is Reinforce, where you're going to embed your SDG commitments even further into your governance practices. And there's a whole set of recommendations about that in the SDG Impact Standards. It's almost like a checklist. You can go through it and very quickly say, we've done that, we haven't done that, we haven't even thought about doing that kind of thing, because it collates it. The second one is, how are you disclosing externally your performance, your practices and performance around SDG impact? And we have divided this into two pieces. One piece is public disclosure, which some companies are required to do, and some entities in certain parts of the world are required to do. And so David at the beginning mentioned SFDR. SFDR is a new set of disclosure requirements that apply to businesses in Europe. They actually align with the ABC goals. So if you have no idea what the ABC goals are and you are doing business in Europe, you need to do this training to understand how these things work. Disclosing publicly is required for some organizations. Disclosing privately, we recommend for all organizations. What is the reporting that you're doing to your own stakeholders? If you're a fund, maybe it's your investment committee, maybe it's your set of shareholders. What are you telling them in more detail about the progress that you're making to measure and manage and achieve impact? And then the last step is, are you ready to have a third party come in and verify your practices? Most of the new independent verification processes are of practice so far, not of performance, but they're kind of correlated, right? If you have good practices, people can trust your performance. It's a little bit like, if you think about a financial audit. The financial audit is there to say you followed the right steps to get to the number. And so therefore we can trust that number, right? And so it's a similar sort of process. All right, so that's the overview of the course. When you put it all together, you have 14 steps. The first steps are the ones that usually take the most time from a change management point of view, from an organization or an investment vehicle, putting them together. The other ones are much more operational and become things that with small tweaks you can keep adding over time. We also have, that is not the whole course, because we also have the same equivalent steps for enterprises. And they're slightly different. They go much deeper into how do you choose what to measure, how do you use the 5 dimensions. Underneath the 5 dimensions, there are 15 data categories. We talk about how those work, and the management processes and operational processes are a little bit more detailed. To pass the course, you actually need to pass quizzes on both. We want investors to know about enterprises, and we want enterprises to know about investors. What I'm going to do now is go a little bit deeper, just for a few minutes, into the integrate impact into your investment cycle, which is a common kind of overview way of looking at this. And for context, I just wanted to kind of show you this. So the idea of this is that if you are really serious about trying to achieve some sort of impact outcome, an SDG outcome or some other outcome, the practice now is a lot more deep than it was, let's say 7 years ago, when Ben Thornley, Jen Emerson, and I wrote a book on what was common practice in high performing funds. We actually talked in that book about you do it at the beginning and you do it at the end. It was mission first and last. That was our construct. This has changed. And so now what you see is people saying, are you integrating this objective and practice into the major steps that you are undertaking as an investor, from sourcing all the way through exit? Are you doing it in a way that will help you optimize impact? And so I just wanted to give you a few examples of this, and then we'll talk to Beth to make it a little bit more real. So under sourcing, for example, do you have relationships with the kinds of potential investees that have higher impact? Have you set up some of your criteria in ways that might exclude them? Do you need to change that? That can apply to a pension fund, right? As well as it could apply to a smaller fund of, what is the expectation of track record that you might have if you're trying to invest in newer fund managers of color, for example, but you have a requirement that all of the people that you invest in have 20 years of experience. That might be a disconnect, right? So how do you look through and remove those disconnects? Under due diligence is a really essential process, and we actually have a whole module on that under step 2. But some of the things here is, do you have a clear narrative on the potential impact of each investment? Have you integrated impact criteria into your due diligence criteria? Some people are starting to actually create quantitative scoring, where impact is given a score weighting and financial things are given a score weighting, and you're basically making decisions across both. And we talk about that in the step 2 module. Investment decision making, again, how are the weights? Do you have people on your investment committee who actually know something about this impact area? This whole governance issue that has come up through Exxon and others, right, is coming down through this, which is, do you have the right people in the room to allow you to make the best decisions that you can? I'm not going to go through all of these. We have kind of closing and deal structures, monitoring and management. How are you going to monitor the different impacts? How are you going to do that differently, specifically for your C-level investments, which require more? And then when you're thinking about exits, can you even define the key criteria for a mission-aligned exit before you even start talking to people? Can you consider what the impacts of this exit might be on the key stakeholders of the investment? So that was a lot. This is all in the course. This is all in one video of the course. So the videos are animations. They are usually between 6 and 15 minutes for each lesson. So they're real easy to kind of watch and then go have lunch and then, watch again. We're trying to make this very, very tangible. And what you end up with after, for example, in this lesson, we went through these particular examples and then we brought Akil. So Akil at the top, you can see he's got 5 SDGs that his fund is targeted. 3 of them are B-level investments, 2 of them are C-level investments. And he decided he and his team, when going through this exercise, decided they needed to add more to their practices for the C-level investments. They needed to develop new criteria. They needed to add more experts. They needed to benchmark progress against others twice a year, right? So very specific, tangible things that are very manageable, but then give them a robustness to achieving the C-level goal throughout the stages of their investment. And we have a similar chart for Paula, but just to show you how we introduce a concept and then show the example of how someone would apply it. And we do that throughout the training. So with that,
Cathy, I'm just if I could just jump in real quick. So I think this example in particular responds to a number of questions in the chat about ESG and impact products. So yeah. I think this is a really good example, this kind of BC classification, navigation, calibration of what you need to do, depending upon what's the nature of the underlying product, I think really comes through in this lesson. So I think it responds to a bunch of the questions about ESG and impact. And then the other question you got a lot about was time horizon. Because everybody, does the course address the temporal dimensions of what you're looking at, especially in the optimization? because impact is a long-term undertaking, and yet there are some indicators, proxy indicators as you're going, because this is an active process that you're encouraging. So maybe you just want to speak to that real quick as you transition to Beth.
Yeah, I mean, time horizon is a huge tension point, as you mentioned, right, between the kind of quarterly drumbeat of financial reporting and the much longer time horizons for solving climate change or educating a population or reducing disease or whatever it is. And so that is actually one part of the standard. One of the SDG standards is around, have you integrated goals that actually align with the time horizon of the problem? And so, you know, the UNDP is trying to encourage firms to give themselves a little bit more wiggle room in the kind of goals that they set. And investors can encourage that as well. So it's a great point. Is Beth on? I'm not seeing her at the top. Beth, are you on?
She had to switch, I know, to her.
I
She is.
am on. I am on.
In your car, on.
I'm in my car. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
well-
This is the beauty of sick children and daycare challenges.
Oh, goodness. I'm sorry. Beth has
No, it's totally
what,
fine.
4 children under 3? Is that what it is?
4 under 4.
4 under 4 now. All right. So we bow to you, super mom, in the car, and also want to know if you can tell us a little bit about how you have integrated these sorts of things across your practices at Calvary, because I know you have done a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I can't stress enough, like how, like Lori said, how important this course is, but also how timely. I mean, I think all of us, whether we've been in the industry for a year or 25 years, are really trying to get sharper on our practices and making sure that we are keeping an eye on the continued best practices in the industry, and how do we get better at doing this every day, every week, and every year. And so we at Calvary Impact Capital we're a early signatory to the operating principles for impact management, and have really gone through each of these steps in depth to really understand where were our strengths and where were our weaknesses, and where do we have real opportunity to improve our practices. And I think the 2 areas where we found where we were kind of, I would say, most in need of improvement. One was the impact risk management, which I think is often not a huge focus. So what can go wrong, and how do you manage that? And then the kind of quote unquote impact at exit, or the kind of exit analysis, where as a lender, we're not typically exiting investments like you would in a private equity context or a venture capital context, but really important that we learn from our portfolio companies and organizations, and incorporate those lessons into our new transactions every time, at every opportunity. And so since our initial verification that we did with Bluemark, we have tried to really incorporate all of the industry best practices in those 2 areas, seeing how we can actively incorporate our impact management into our credit management processes. So for example, we have, like most folks do, a kind of a process where if we have troubled credits, we monitor them more closely. We are in greater contact with our borrowers. We're looking at the latest kind of implications, what's going on, how can we help? And we've now integrated our impact risk processes with our same credit risk processes, so that we are more actively managing our impact risks. And then for impact exit, we've really been looking at how do we interview our borrowers after we kind of end a relationship, and see where there were opportunities for improvement, where we've added value, where we haven't, where we could think about doing it differently. And so really trying to get sharper on that piece. I would say overall, the piece where we still need a lot of work, both as an organization and as an industry, is really the the kind of work that I saw Lindsay on the phone, the work that Lindsay and the 60 decibels team are doing in really trying to get more active, direct feedback from the people we are trying to help. Because we are at the kind of intermediary level, that has been more difficult for us to kind of understand and have contact with the end customer or the end borrower. But that, I think, the industry is starting to get sharper on, and really, I think there's some really exciting opportunities going forward on how to collect active, real-time or close to real-time data and feedback from the communities that we're serving, to make sure that we're doing so in a way that is meets the intention of the work. And so, really excited to see the reaction to a lot of investors and others and enterprises to the content in this course, and see how that pushes us all forward in thinking about how we can more actively, robustly measure and manage the impact, not just for our external audiences, but for kind of our everyday practices as investors.
Fabulous. Thank you, Beth. So it's an ongoing process, right? So you guys have been doing this for quite some time, and there's still more to be done.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that was the biggest aha for me, was that, we've been doing this for 25 years. We started, pre my time at Calvary on spreadsheets. We now have much more robust systems, and there's still a lot of room for improvement. But huge shout out and thank you to my colleague, Caitlin Rosser, who manages all of our IMM work, who has just really continued to kind of work collaboratively across the field to understand who is learning what and who is doing what, so that we can basically kind of take the best of every organization and pull it under one house. And I think that's what's so exciting about this space, is that this is not a competitive landscape. It's really a collaborative one, with everybody trying to learn what is working, what is not, so that we can all get better, because I think it's certainly a high tide that rises all boats if this is really understood and incorporated and used as key pieces of information as investors and asset owners are making decisions.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you so much, Beth. Love the context and the depth of your experience that your team brings to this. I just wanted to end with two other small things. One is that all the videos end with kind of this little checklist. It's like the cheat sheet, because I like cheat sheets, of how do you make it real? What are the key takeaways? And this is the takeaway from this particular lesson. So you just got an overview of one of the 14 investor lessons, right? So to give you a sense of what that was. The other thing that I mentioned, and I wanted to mention, and Carrie did it, but it may have gone by so fast that you might want to do it again. We also have worksheets and templates and things for you to use with your teams. And in this particular lesson, we have something called the Integrate Impact into Your Investment Cycle worksheet that Carrie has just posted a link to. We're going to give it to you guys all today so you can take a look. It's just something that you can download quickly and start to say, where are we currently? What do we need to do next? And kind of, who might do that, or which one's the most important? Or, again, we are trying to make this imminently practical things that you can decide to do and start doing very quickly. So with that, yeah.
Cathy, I just wanted to say a couple things, which is for folks who for whom this is not enough, we're going to be running, starting next week, a 5-part series with Cathy that picks up on many of the themes that she's talked about here and goes deeper. And each one will have a video from the course. So the impact management journey, the 5 dimensions of impact, the ABC goals, the data for decision-making mindset, and then capping it with how do investors optimize impact. So look out for those starting next week. And the other thing is, I think you mentioned Michael McHarg has finished the course and has put it on his LinkedIn profile, and we're running the Optimizing for Impact Challenge. So if you take the course, I think you have to take the paid version, not the free version, so you can get the certificate. If you get that certificate, you can put it on your LinkedIn profile. If you do that, you can send a note. What is it, Cathy? The email we'll put in the chat.
The email's right there, case@fuqua.duke.edu. You send us, we need you to send us your LinkedIn profile, because otherwise we do not know who has finished this course. It's all anonymized for us. So if you want us to recognize you, send us a link to your LinkedIn profile and we will be happy to.
And we'll have a little recognition in Impact Alpha, and Case has promised a small prize. So the Optimizing for Impact Challenge.
Yep, great. And so now I think we can throw it open for Q&A if you like.
I've been looking at some of the questions coming up in the text line. So if folks want to add more questions there, but we could start with a couple that some of which you've gone over. So the first one, this is literally just going through sort of in the order they came in, but William Senf asked about the role of nonprofits that get debt instead of equity, and whether that's covered in the course.
We do not necessarily differentiate on the enterprise side or on the investor side what your legal form is, because these are management practices, and we think that they are universal. The idea of setting your goals, integrating your goals, optimizing on them, and making sure that they are reinforced with your stakeholders, I don't think it matters. I think if anything, we do talk a little bit about universities, because university endowments are under a great deal of pressure by their stakeholders to align with sustainable development in ways that they do not always want to do. I think nonprofits often have more complicated stakeholders and actually need to pay more attention to these issues in many ways than for-profits.
This is Marie Mayenel, I'm not sure I got that from the email. What measurement tools out there are actually helpful from an impact lens while we are dealing with lack of regulations, lack of incentives, and reluctant mindsets? By effective measurement tools, I mean tools that aren't just number manipulation for less than truthful PR purposes.
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning part of that. Can you say it again?
I guess it's measurement tools that are helpful from an impact lens.
So we tried to, so this is a video-based course. It took us 2 years to produce, and we've started producing the videos a year and a half ago. So one of the things that we tried to do was make this course so that it would last more than a month. Because of all the effort and time and money that it took to do this. And so we assume and expect that impact measurement tools will continue to proliferate and get more and more advanced as the field grows. We link to them. So we have resources in the, during a module where it's, how do you reach out to stakeholders? We say, here's 60 decibels. Here's what you can do with the B-Lab SDG Impact Manager. Here's what you can do with City Light Capital's new tool. Here are the tools that are out there. Those are going to change and hopefully become better over time. But we're trying to show you kind of where you might want to plug them in, but we are agnostic about what specific metric tools people use or specific metrics. Several people in the chat have said, do you link to IRIS? We do link to IRIS, but IRIS is now organized around the 5 dimensions. And so the most important thing to know is, what are you trying to test that you need dimension data to test? And then you can choose an IRIS metric that aligns with that. So it's part of it's almost like we're putting a structure together, and you can hook these things in like Legos at the right place.
Another one, then this comes up a lot, and I know it's been a weak spot even in some of the IFC evaluations, but how do you future-proof to keep impact measures in place post-acquisition? So sort of impact anchoring. Yeah,
that's a great question. I think that, there's been a lot of writing, and we link to some of those resources in our resources under module, under the module that I showed you, the integrate module, because that's where we talk most about exits from an investor point of view. What can you do to lock in mission? You can try to incorporate as a B Corp, a benefit corp, or some other form that might be relevant in a different country. You can change the charter of the business itself. You can, write into your governance materials, what the goals are in terms of specific SDGs, and make sure that you are actually screening potential exit opportunities in accordance with those goals. I think there's much more that people could do, and I'd love to fill out more of that. So if anybody has great ideas on mission lock strategies that we can put in, I would love it. That's the other thing I just wanted to mention, David. We have such an incredible community on the phone today. We were able to put this course out and we're really happy with it. It is 2 weeks old, so it hasn't decayed yet. But what I would really love to ask people also is if you have examples or reports or things that you are doing that you think would help us to review for possible inclusion in the course or to put in the resources, please send them to us. We would love to make this an ongoing living platform as the whole field makes progress.
There was an interesting question about being an enterprise and investor at the same time. This comes from Tabileng Motabi. I'm in mining and we operate both as an enterprise and investor as per regulatory framework. So they're on both sides of the use case.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it'd be interesting as you do the training to think about which parts of the enterprise guidance and which parts of the investor guidance are most appropriate to you. Most funds consider themselves both, right? Because they have to raise money from other stakeholders, which are kind of like, in some ways, their customers. And so that there is a kind of crossover in the value chain that I've seen people talk about before.
Another question that comes up often is who bears the burden and the cost of impact measurement? Is it the enterprise? Is it the investor? In this case, Anup says for investors that have small budgets, the enterprises may have small budgets for this as well, but for the investors, are there sources of capital to help small investors better integrate impact measurement and management?
I don't know how to answer that. I don't know if Lori has an answer to that. I feel like there's a kind of we all want to do this more, but it does cost time and energy to do it, and money. I feel like it's a negotiation that goes on between an investor and an investee. Here's what I'm trying to do. What are the management practices that you have in place or that you couldn't put in place to support it, and how important are they to us both? Right? I feel like it's another conversation that needs to happen. I also feel like the ABC goals can simplify some of that, because if you're not targeting a C investment, this is not actually that hard to do. It's not.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the only thing I would add, Cathy, is that I think the course also shows that alignment that you've talked about a couple of times, from the investment considerations to the enterprise that's actually generating the impact. So this shouldn't just be outsourcing and burdening the enterprise. The investor should have an appetite for this information, and you can calibrate both on where it falls, whether it's an ESG or a deeper impact type product, but also I think that relationship between the investor and the enterprise, or the asset manager and the enterprise. So I think there's some opportunity to right size what you're asking for and what you're putting in place. I think that's right.
There was a question about, someone's had his hand up. Ibrahim, you've had your hand up for a while, and I think this is your question. When can we see the seal? And how should consultants use the course? I would like consultants to take the course and think about how they can support the different entities that they work with on these different tasks, right? You can be very, very helpful in doing that. The seal is in development, and so I can't speak more to timing, but it is currently in development right now.
Cathy, a quick question.
Sorry, we're at the top of the hour, so obviously if people have to leave for other engagements, they should feel free to do so, but we'll keep going for a little bit, and then we'll do the usual happy hour or after party that we do. So hang around if you can, but obviously leave if you need to.
Thanks, everybody. And I'll stay on for 20 more minutes.
Yeah. Sorry, a question was coming up from the floor here, or no?
Yeah. Hi, I guess like kind of going off of that, Cathy, one really awesome course. I just completed it on Sunday. I learned a lot from it. I guess like trying to understand where the course is situated, knowing that the seal is in development. I guess like, is it fair to say that like in doing the course and implementing all the 4 principles, is that kind of the best way to prepare for certification for whenever this UN seal does come out? Thanks.
Yes, what the UNDP is doing now is going through each of their standards and trying to determine what is verifiable under that standard. What we've done is taken the standards and organized them into a process, so that if you go through this process, you will, and you can use the standards or in the training, you can use that as a checklist for, you know, have I done these things? You'll find that they kind of appear in multiple standards, which is why we simplified it, right? The governance thing appears in like 10 of the standards. So, you know, you can go through the governance checklist and say, have we done these things? And then when the seal comes out, you will be much closer to understanding what they're asking and implementing more of them in line with those objectives. And I don't know if there's anyone on from UNDP who wants to chat in a different answer to that, but that's how I would interpret it.
Thank you, Cathy. Hello, everyone. Just so you know, I just support everything that Cathy said, and you are so happy. She did such an amazing work with her team, and thank you, everyone, for being here. And we are developing the assurance framework, and we're going to have the minimum requirements for each practice indicator under the standards. But as Cathy said, we feel confident that by taking the course and applying what is out there, it's going to be much easier. But we will do our bit and give you as much detail as possible and training, so you're ready for the seal that really take us to the Olympics level of sustainability, and that's what we want for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Appreciate it.
Will the seal cost money? I guess I don't know if you guys are able to like give us some insight, but like, will it cost money to seek a certification, or is that like gotta be tight-lipped about that?
Yes, we will have a proprietary framework, so it's gonna be open source for everyone, but we're gonna train individuals that want to be assurers, right? So I guess we hope the market is gonna step in and they're gonna offer those services, and you will have to pay for it. But from our end, everything we put out there is really open source and a public good. So if there's anything we can help you with, you have Cathy, her team, and us too, if we can help. Thank you.
Cathy, I think there's a question. Tabileng wants to chime in directly. So Tabileng, if you want to speak up.
Thank you so much, Cathy and team. For me, my question really is around, so one looks at the 3 SDG principles on leaving no one behind and universal, the SDGs being universal, and the third one being common but differentiated responsibilities. And so how does the course, to a certain extent, integrate those principles, those 3 principles, into the impact measurement and management of SDGs? Thank you.
So one of the ways that the course integrates principles of not leaving anyone behind and serving underserved populations is that we are focused on the SDGs. And unlike, I would say, some common understanding of the SDGs, which is if I'm working in education, I'm actually addressing an SDG. SDGs have very specific targets. And we actually recommend that you define your SDG outcomes around specific targets within the SDG framework. Many of them are around, are you actually addressing the need of an underserved population? And so some of them are the environment, right, which is all of us. But you know, we give the example in the training, we have a Keels Fund actually addressing education in Asia. And we talk about how they realized that some of the areas that the SDGs actually targeted, they didn't feel were investable. And so they made these decisions about what is the overlap between my investment thesis and the actual part of the market that needs to be addressed, that is most important to address globally. That doesn't mean it's not important to do other sorts of education investments, but it's really not targeting that SDG. And so just getting more granular to understand what the SDG targets are. We define SDG outcomes as a combination of what and who, right? The 2 dimensions, what outcome for which population. And if you read the SDGs very carefully, many of them have a very specific population in mind and specific outcomes that they are trying to address. And so Tabileng, I think it gets in here in some ways from the structure the global structure that we're tapped into.
Cathy, if I could just add, I think what it also does, if people follow this practice more and more, and both if we encourage and people are motivated, but also some of the regulatory, the washing, the other pressures that are encouraging people to do this, I think we'll see where capital is not flowing. mean, that's also part of what, I mean, there's a question in the chat from Graham, which I really respect. It's like, hey, wait a minute here. You know, how do we get down to the real level? What's really happening in people's lives and in places that are not always visible and not represented in investor conversations? And I think part of what we do here is shine a spotlight and show that when somebody sometimes makes a rhetorical claim of how great their impact is, hold them accountable. Because let's just look at where that money is flowing and what's really happening on the ground, and not allow people to overclaim the people, the who in particular of your who and what dimensions. I think that is a really important part for the whole field, not just on an individual investment basis.
To that point, there's another question from Ash Das. When it comes to impact verification, how does one strike the balance between micromanaging records to verify impact alongside Scout's honor? Essentially, how do you know that a company is responding truthfully to the impact
surveys? Yeah, I think that's an issue with any sort of surveying or verification. And again, I would think of financial audits, right? What do we do with financial audits? You don't look at every piece of paper that the company has filed. You do random spot checks and you figure out. The B Corp survey does the same thing, right? It does a random drilling into specific things, and if you do 3 of those and they don't match, then you start drilling more, right? So there's an iterative process of trust and confidence that we've already developed for many other processes that we need to apply to this fuzzy thing called impact. And I think we are making huge strides toward that. And now we're saying, and you have to actually make decisions based on that, and set yourself up to be able to continually manage it. So I think it's progress. There are always risks, right? There are always risks that the impact verification can be played, and some people may not, may get through who shouldn't, and all those sorts of things are part of any of this. But I just, we have a long history of seals, certifications, and accounting audits that I think we are not me, but many other organizations are bringing into this, which is Graham is saying, where's the money going and what impact is it actually having? That's what we all care about. And so to build this infrastructure up so that more investors can say, if I do want to invest for impact, I know where it's going, and we can counter the ESG fear that many people have that ESG doesn't mean much. And even though the dollars are rising, there's no definition of what it's actually going to.
The questions are actually coming, as always, right at the end here.
More and more, yeah.
There was one about aligning impact risk with credit risk. And in general, I think that the question is sort of, how do you align these impact indicators and measurement with the financial and make it all fit together?
I think they're 2 different kinds of risk, honestly. I think that credit risk is about what is the risk that your financial return will not materialize. I think impact risk, which we define in the course, and we have a whole chart on in the course, is about what are the risks that my impact will not materialize the way that I want. Sometimes those are correlated, sometimes they are entirely different. And so I feel like, could you add impact risk to credit risk in a scoring? Yes, but could they become completely correlated? Most of the time, the answer would be no.
I remember I think it was at a GIN forum at one point, somebody asked in the audience if anybody would raise their hand if they had ever ended an investment because the impact hadn't actually played out as promised, and not a single investor raised their hand. So there was not sort of an indication of the distance yet to be covered for assessing impact risk. I think I was going to use Graham's question as sort of the setup for your sort of final word, Cathy, because it gets to how does this course, help us get actions and money to the right places? How does this become not just box ticking as people sometimes say, and actually gets to optimizing? So if you think about that, in a year or two, as impact measurement becomes more common, what's different?
Yeah, well, 2 things. One is I want to see, selfishly as a university professor, I can say this, I don't know if I can make it happen. I want to see a professional credential, whether it's this free Coursera course or something else, that we require people who are doing this work to actually have some differentiated skills from the other financial management that we teach people to do. And I'm thrilled that we have this partnership with Impact Alpha to get the first 100 people kind of saying this matters. I would like to see employers in the impact investing field say, I won't hire you unless you have this credential. I can't control that, but that's what I'd like to see. Second, on a more meta level, I would like to see public impact reports change. I would like to see the reports be much more as they are about finance, what happened, what we learned, what we're going to target going forward, not just the good things put into a chart. I don't want to see any more outputs in an impact report. I don't think people know what that means. And so I want to see the kind of learning process and really good management. We know what good management looks like. We have all these business schools that teach it. What does it look like for impact? And can we start to be putting that into the conversations in the boardrooms and into either public or private reports so that we are actually learning together about how well this organization or this fund was able to meet its goals?
Well, Anoop suggests we call it the Cathy Clark School of Impact. So you're all enrolled now. You're not yet graduated, but you're all enrolled. I think let's leave the formal program there, Cathy, unless there's anything else we need to do. I want to encourage everybody again to send Cathy your certificate, or at least news of your certificate, and watch out for the Optimizing for Impact series. We'll have the video replay of this very call, which you may not need since you were on it, but you can pass it around to your friends, and a bit of a write-up later in the week. Make sure you sign up for the call 2 weeks hence, Black Tech Green Solutions, and we can hang out and leave the Zoom chat open and have sort of just free for all for the moment for a few more minutes. Thank you so much, Cathy, Beth, Lori, and everybody, and everybody for coming. So
thank you all. It was wonderful discussion, and I feel so grateful to be in this community with all of these agents of impact globally. So thank you.
Great.